The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside the dusty town of Redemption, Texas, and Eleanor Morrison knew with absolute certainty that running 3,000 miles across the country would never be far enough to escape the memories that haunted her sleep. She stepped down onto the sun-baked earth with trembling legs, her dark blue traveling dress already clinging to her skin in the oppressive July heat of 1876. The town sprawled before her like a promise she was not sure she could trust, all weathered wood and sun-bleached paint, the kind of place where people came to disappear or to start over. Eleanor hoped desperately that she could do both. The other passengers dispersed quickly, eager to escape the cramped confines of the coach after 3 grueling days of travel. Eleanor stood alone with her single trunk and carpet bag, watching the dust settle around her boots. She had left everything behind in Philadelphia, her mother's house, her teaching position at the girls' academy, and most importantly, the wreckage of what she had foolishly believed was love. "Miss Morrison," a weathered voice cut through her thoughts. Eleanor turned to find an older woman with iron-gray hair twisted into a severe bun, her face lined with the kind of wrinkles that came from smiling more than frowning, despite what her stern expression suggested. She wore a practical calico dress and a white apron that had seen better days. "I am Eleanor Morrison, yes," Eleanor replied, forcing herself to stand straighter despite the exhaustion that pulled at her bones. "I am Martha Hendricks. I run the boarding house where you will be staying. Welcome to Redemption." The woman's eyes were sharp and assessing, but not unkind. "You look about ready to drop. Let me help you with that bag." Before Eleanor could protest, Martha had already hoisted the carpetbag with surprising strength. Eleanor grabbed the handle of her trunk and began dragging it through the dusty street, following Martha toward a 2-story building that looked marginally more maintained than its neighbors. The boarding house was simple but clean, with lace curtains in the windows and a front porch that offered merciful shade from the relentless sun. Martha led her inside to a narrow room on the 2nd floor that contained a brass bed, a washstand, a small wardrobe, and a window that overlooked the main street. "It is not much, but the sheets are clean and the roof does not leak," Martha said, setting the carpetbag on the bed. "Supper is at 6. Do not be late or you will go hungry." "Thank you," Eleanor managed, her voice hoarse from the dust and the emotion she kept locked tight in her chest. Martha paused at the door, her expression softening just slightly. "I do not know what brought you out here, girl, and I will not ask. But Redemption has a way of living up to its name if you let it." Then she was gone, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. Eleanor sank onto the bed and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to feel the full weight of her exhaustion and fear. Then she stood, unpacked her few belongings, and washed the travel grime from her face and hands with the water in the pitcher. She had come to Redemption to take a position as the new schoolteacher, replacing the previous teacher who had gotten married and moved to Austin. It was honest work and it was far from Philadelphia, and that was all she needed. She changed into a fresh dress, pinned her honey-brown hair into a neat bun, and made her way downstairs as the clock struck 6. The dining room was filled with boarders, a mix of ranch hands, a clerk from the general store, and a traveling salesman who talked too much and too loud. Eleanor took a seat at the far end of the table and kept her eyes on her plate, grateful that no one seemed inclined to engage her in conversation beyond basic pleasantries. The food was simple but plentiful: beef stew, cornbread, and stewed apples. Eleanor ate mechanically, tasting nothing, aware only of the need to fuel her body for whatever came next. She was just finishing when the front door opened and a man walked in, his boot heels striking the wooden floor with quiet authority. Eleanor glanced up despite herself and felt her breath catch in her throat. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was all hard angles and sharp planes, weathered by wind and sun, with a shadow of stubble along his jaw. But it was his eyes that held her, a deep brown that seemed to miss nothing, framed by fine lines that suggested he smiled more than he frowned despite the serious set to his mouth. He wore typical cowboy attire, dusty denim trousers, a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows revealing strong forearms, and a vest that had seen considerable wear. A gun belt sat low on his hips, the revolver resting easy in its holster like a natural extension of his body. "Evening, Colt," Martha called from the kitchen doorway. "You are late." "Got held up at the Morrison ranch," the man replied, his voice a low rumble that did something strange to Eleanor's pulse. "One of the mares was having trouble foaling. She came through fine, though. There is stew left. Sit down before it gets cold." The man called Colt nodded and moved to take a seat. His eyes swept the table and landed on Eleanor for just a moment, a brief, assessing glance that she felt all the way to her bones. Then he sat down 2 chairs away from her and accepted the bowl that Martha brought him. "This is our new schoolteacher, Miss Eleanor Morrison," Martha announced, seemingly determined to force some kind of introduction. "She arrived on the afternoon stage. Miss Morrison, this is Colt Brennan. He works at the Morrison Ranch. No relation to you, I assume?" "None," Eleanor said quietly, forcing herself to meet his eyes for just a moment before dropping her gaze back to her plate. "How do you do, Mr. Brennan, ma'am?" His voice was polite but distant, and Eleanor was grateful for it. The last thing she needed was attention from anyone, especially a man who looked like he could break her heart just by smiling. She finished her meal in silence, excused herself quickly, and retreated to her room. Through the thin walls, she could hear the low murmur of conversation downstairs, the occasional burst of laughter, the ordinary sounds of people living their lives. Eleanor sat on her bed in the gathering darkness and tried not to think about the last time she had felt safe in the world. His name had been Thomas Whitmore, and he had been everything a young woman in Philadelphia was supposed to want: handsome, educated, from a good family with money and prospects. He had courted her with poetry and flowers, had spoken of marriage and a future filled with all the things she had dreamed about. And Eleanor, lonely and naive and desperate to believe that someone could love her, had given him everything: her heart, her trust, and ultimately her innocence in a moment of weakness that she had believed was the prelude to their wedding. But there had been no wedding. Thomas had taken what he wanted and then disappeared, leaving behind nothing but rumors and whispers that had destroyed her reputation beyond repair. She had lost her teaching position, lost the respect of everyone she knew, and had nearly lost her mind from the shame and betrayal that consumed her. Coming to Texas was supposed to be her salvation, a place where no one knew her story, where she could rebuild something resembling a life. But the fear lived in her still, a constant companion that whispered in her ear that she would never be safe again, that she would never be whole again, that any man who showed her kindness was just another Thomas waiting to happen. Eleanor did not sleep well that first night. She dozed fitfully, waking often to the unfamiliar sounds of the town and the memories that would not leave her alone. When dawn finally broke, washing her room in pale gold light, she rose and dressed with care, preparing herself for her first day at the schoolhouse. Martha had given her directions the night before, and Eleanor found the building easily enough. A simple one-room structure at the edge of town, with a small bell tower and windows that needed washing. The door was unlocked, and inside she found 20 desks in varying states of repair, a blackboard and a teacher's desk that wobbled when she touched it. But it was hers. This space was hers and the work was hers, and no one could take that away from her. Eleanor spent the morning cleaning and organizing, preparing lesson plans for students she had not yet met, losing herself in the familiar comfort of structure and routine. She did not hear the door open behind her, did not realize she was no longer alone until a voice said, "You are here early." Eleanor spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. Colt Brennan stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands, the morning light casting him in silhouette. For just a moment, the irrational fear that Thomas had somehow followed her seized her throat, and she took an instinctive step backward. Colt's expression shifted immediately, his eyes sharpening with concern. He took a careful step back, putting more distance between them, his posture deliberately non-threatening. "Did not mean to startle you, ma'am. I knocked, but I guess you did not hear." Eleanor forced herself to breathe, to push down the panic that had flared so quickly. "I apologize. I was distracted with my work. Can I help you with something, Mr. Brennan?" He studied her for a long moment, and Eleanor had the uncomfortable sensation that he saw far more than she wanted him to. But when he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "Martha asked me to come by and fix that desk for you. She mentioned it was wobbly, thought I should take care of it before the students arrive tomorrow." "That is very kind of you." Eleanor clasped her hands in front of her to hide their trembling. "I would be grateful." Colt nodded and moved into the room with an easy, unhurried gait that somehow made the space feel smaller. He knelt beside the desk, examining the legs with careful attention, and Eleanor found herself studying him despite her better judgment. There was a quiet competence to his movements, a sense that he was a man who knew how to fix things and did not need to make a show of it. "You have some loose screws and a cracked leg," he said after a moment. "Nothing I cannot fix, but it might take a couple of hours. Will I be in your way?" "No, of course not. I have plenty to keep me occupied." Eleanor retreated to the far side of the room and busied herself with arranging books on a shelf, trying not to be aware of the man working 10 feet away from her. But awareness was impossible to avoid. She heard the quiet sounds of his work, the rasp of sandpaper, the tap of a hammer, the low whistle he made under his breath. Occasionally he would say something, asking her to hand him a tool from his bag or making an observation about the building that required no response. His presence filled the room in a way that should have been threatening but somehow was not. After an hour, Eleanor's curiosity overcame her caution. "Have you lived in Redemption long, Mr. Brennan?" "About 5 years now," he replied without looking up from his work. "Came down from Montana after my father passed. The Morrison ranch needed a foreman and I needed a fresh start." "I see." She hesitated, then added, "Martha mentioned you helped with a difficult birth last night. Are you a veterinarian as well as a rancher?" That made him smile, a small quirk of his lips that transformed his entire face. "Not officially, but I have been working with horses since I could walk. You pick up things over the years. That mare last night was a first-time mother, nervous as hell, heck. Needed someone with a gentle hand to talk her through it. And the foal is well, a colt, healthy and strong, already trying to stand when I left." There was genuine warmth in his voice, a softness that made something ache in Eleanor's chest. There is nothing quite like watching a new life come into the world. Reminds you that good things can still happen, even when the world feels hard. Eleanor did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But she thought about his words for the rest of the morning, turning them over in her mind like river stones. When Colt finally declared the desk fixed, the sun was high overhead and Eleanor's stomach was reminding her that she had skipped breakfast. She tested the desk carefully, sitting in the chair and finding it solid and stable beneath her weight. "This is perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Brennan. What do I owe you for your time?" He looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Nothing, ma'am. I was happy to help." "Martha would have my hide if I charged the new schoolteacher for a simple repair. Still, I appreciate it." Eleanor stood and smoothed her skirts, acutely aware of how tall he was now that they were both standing. "You have been very kind. It is what neighbors do." Colt settled his hat on his head and gathered his tools. "If you need anything else, just ask. Welcome to Redemption, Miss Morrison. I hope it treats you well." Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor alone with the scent of wood shavings and the strange, unsettled feeling in her chest that she did not want to examine too closely. The next morning, Eleanor's students arrived, 18 children ranging in age from 6 to 14. A mix of ranch kids and town children with sun-browned faces and curious eyes. They filed into the schoolhouse with varying degrees of enthusiasm, taking their seats and watching their new teacher with the frank assessment that children everywhere employed. Eleanor stood before them and felt the familiar calm of her profession settle over her shoulders like a cloak. This was what she knew, this was what she was good at. Whatever else had been taken from her, she still had this. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and steady. "My name is Miss Morrison, and I am very pleased to be your teacher this year. I know that some of you may be unsure about having someone new, but I promise that we are going to learn wonderful things together." She spent the first day learning their names and assessing their skills, quickly identifying which students needed extra help and which were ready for more challenging work. There was a girl named Sarah, 12 years old with braided blonde hair, who read at a level far beyond her years. A pair of twin boys, Jacob and Joshua, who could barely sit still but showed remarkable aptitude for mathematics. A shy 6-year-old named Emma who watched Eleanor with huge brown eyes and flinched whenever anyone raised their voice. By the end of the day, Eleanor was exhausted but satisfied. The children had been well behaved, eager to learn despite the summer heat that made the schoolroom stifling by afternoon. She dismissed them with homework assignments and instructions to arrive on time the next morning, then collapsed into her newly repaired chair and allowed herself a moment of pride. She had done it. She had made it through her first day without falling apart, without letting the fear win. Maybe, just maybe, she could actually build a life here. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Eleanor rose early, walked to the schoolhouse, taught her students, and returned to the boarding house for supper each evening. She kept to herself mostly, polite but distant with the other boarders, avoiding anything that might lead to questions about her past. But she could not avoid Colt Brennan. He seemed to be everywhere, fixing a loose shutter on the boarding house, helping old Mr. Peterson load supplies into his wagon, breaking up a scuffle between two ranch hands outside the saloon. And always, when their paths crossed, he would tip his hat and offer a quiet "ma'am" that made her pulse skip in ways she desperately tried to ignore. It was Martha who finally forced the issue, 3 weeks after Eleanor's arrival. She cornered Eleanor in the parlor one evening with a determined look in her eyes. "There is a barn dance at the Morrison Ranch this Saturday," Martha announced. "The whole town will be there, you should come." Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse. "I do not think. You have been here nearly a month and you barely speak to anyone except your students," Martha interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I know you came here to escape something, girl. I am not blind. But hiding in your room every evening is not living. Come to the dance, meet people, let them see that you are part of this community." "I am not much for dancing," Eleanor said weakly. "Then do not dance, but come anyway." Martha's expression softened just slightly. "Redemption can be a hard place, but it can also be a good one. You just have to give it a chance." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to explain that she was not hiding, she was protecting herself, but the words caught in her throat and she found herself nodding instead. "All right, I will come." Saturday arrived too quickly. Eleanor dressed in her best dress, a soft green cotton that brought out the color of her hazel eyes, and tried not to think of this as a mistake. Martha drove them out to the Morrison Ranch in her small wagon, chattering about who would be there and what food people were bringing, seemingly determined to fill the silence with information whether Eleanor wanted it or not. The ranch was larger than Eleanor had expected, sprawling across a valley with good grazing land and a main house that spoke of prosperity without ostentation. Behind the house, a massive barn had been cleared and decorated with lanterns that cast a warm, golden glow as the sun began to set. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and a group of musicians were tuning their instruments in the corner. People were everywhere, ranchers and townspeople, families with children running wild, couples already swaying to the music that had just begun. Eleanor felt immediately overwhelmed, the noise and crowd pressing in on her in ways that made her want to turn and run back to her quiet room. "There you are." A woman's voice cut through Eleanor's rising panic. She turned to find a striking woman with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes, dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress. "You must be Miss Morrison. I am Catherine Morrison. This is my family's ranch. I am so glad you could come." "Thank you for inviting me," Eleanor managed, charmed despite herself by Catherine's warm smile. "It is our pleasure. We are always happy to welcome new people to our community. Come, let me introduce you to some folks." Before Eleanor could protest, Catherine had linked their arms and was steering her into the crowd. She introduced Eleanor to what felt like half the town: the doctor and his wife, the owner of the general store, several ranchers and their families, all of whom greeted her with varying degrees of curiosity and welcome. Eleanor's head was spinning by the time Catherine finally released her near the food tables with instructions to eat something and enjoy herself. Eleanor accepted a glass of lemonade from a cheerful woman, whose name she had already forgotten, and retreated to a relatively quiet corner where she could observe without being observed. She was watching the dancers, couples spinning and laughing with an easy joy she could barely remember feeling when a familiar voice spoke behind her. Not much for dancing or not much for crowds. Eleanor turned to find Colt Brennan standing a respectful distance away, 2 plates of food in his hands. He looked different tonight, she realized. Still wearing his typical work clothes but cleaner, with his hair neatly combed and his jaw freshly shaved. The effect was devastating in ways she did not want to acknowledge. "Both, I think," she admitted, surprised by her own honesty. Colt nodded as if this made perfect sense. "I am not much for either myself, but Martha threatened to stop feeding me if I did not show up, so here I am." He offered her one of the plates. "Figured you might be hungry. The food is actually pretty good." Eleanor hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to refuse, to maintain distance, to protect herself. But the plate smelled wonderful, and she had barely eaten all day, and there was something about the way he stood there, patient and undemanding, ready to accept rejection without taking offense. That made her want to trust him despite everything Thomas had taught her about the foolishness of trust. "Thank you," she said softly, accepting the plate. They ate in comfortable silence, watching the dancers and the crowd. Colt did not push for conversation, did not ask probing questions or make unwanted observations. He simply existed beside her, a calm presence in the chaos, and Eleanor found herself relaxing in increments she had not thought possible. "Your students seem to like you," Colt said eventually. "I have heard several parents talking about how much their kids are learning. Sarah Patterson's mother says her daughter actually looks forward to school now. Sarah is a bright girl. She just needed someone to challenge her." Eleanor felt a genuine smile tug at her lips. "They are all good children. I am lucky to have them. They are lucky to have you." There was something in his voice, a warmth and approval that made her chest tighten. Before she could respond, a commotion near the barn entrance drew their attention. 2 men were arguing, their voices rising above the music. Eleanor recognized one of them as a ranch hand who boarded at Martha's, a man named Jack Riley who drank too much and had a temper to match. Colt set down his plate with a quiet sigh. "Excuse me, ma'am, I should probably handle this before it gets out of hand." He moved toward the argument with quiet authority, and Eleanor watched as he inserted himself between the 2 men, his posture calm but unmistakably firm. She could not hear what he said, but whatever it was worked. The tension drained from the situation, and both men stepped back, though Riley shot Colt a look of pure resentment before stalking off into the darkness. Colt returned a few minutes later, shaking his head. "Sorry about that. Riley has been looking for a fight all week. I was hoping he would stay away tonight." "You handled it well," Eleanor observed. "Not many men could have diffused that without violence. Violence is easy. Keeping the peace takes actual effort." He picked up his plate again, his expression thoughtful. "My father used to say that any fool can throw a punch, but it takes a real man to walk away from one. Took me a long time to learn that lesson." Eleanor found herself curious despite her better judgment. "Your father sounds like he was wise." He was. Something shadowed Colt's expression for just a moment. Lost him to pneumonia 5 years back. My mother passed when I was young, so it was just the two of us for most of my life. Taught me everything I know about horses and honor and treating people right. I am sorry for your loss, Eleanor said quietly, meaning it. Thank you. He met her eyes, and Eleanor felt something pass between them, a shared understanding of grief, of loss, of the weight of carrying forward when everything you knew had been taken away. What about you? Do you have family back east? The question was gentle, but Eleanor felt her walls slam back into place anyway. My mother, she was not pleased about me coming to Texas, but you came anyway. I had my reasons. Her voice came out colder than she intended, sharp with the need to protect herself. Colt nodded, accepting the boundary she had just drawn without question or offense. We all have our reasons for the choices we make. No judgment here, Miss Morrison. They finished their food in silence, but it was no longer comfortable. Eleanor could feel the tension radiating from her own body, the familiar fear that she had said too much, revealed too much, made herself vulnerable in ways that would only lead to pain. When Colt excused himself to help with something at the main house, Eleanor felt both relief and an inexplicable sense of loss. She stayed at the dance for another hour because leaving too early would have raised questions, but she kept to the shadows, avoided conversation, and counted the minutes until Martha declared it was time to go home. That night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling around her, Eleanor tried not to think about the warmth in Colt Brennan's eyes or the way his presence had made her feel almost safe for the first time in over a year. Tried and failed. The following weeks brought an early autumn to redemption, the oppressive heat of summer gradually giving way to cooler mornings and evenings that made breathing easier. Eleanor continued her routine, teaching, writing, keeping to herself. But increasingly, she found her solitude interrupted by Colt Brennan. It started small. He would appear at the schoolhouse to fix something that did not really need fixing, a loose board on the steps, a window that stuck, the roof that supposedly had a leak though Eleanor had never noticed one. He never stayed long, never pushed for conversation, but his presence became a regular fixture in her days. Then there were the other things. Eleanor would find her woodpile mysteriously restocked before she had a chance to ask for more. A crate of apples appeared on the schoolhouse steps with a note saying they were extras from someone's harvest. When Eleanor's cloak was stolen from the church pew during Sunday service, a petty theft that left her close to tears because she could not afford to replace it. A new one appeared on her bed 2 days later, wrapped in plain brown paper with no note or explanation. Eleanor knew it was Colt. Martha's knowing looks confirmed it, even though the older woman never said anything directly. And Eleanor did not know what to do with this knowledge, this kindness that asked for nothing in return. She had learned the hard way that men did not give gifts without expecting something back. Thomas had showered her with attention and trinkets, and she had paid for every single one with pieces of herself until there was nothing left to give. The memory made her want to return everything Colt had given her, to refuse his help, to push him away before she made the same mistake twice. But she did not, and she could not quite explain why, even to herself. It was mid-October when everything changed. Eleanor was walking back to the boarding house after a particularly long day at the schoolhouse, her arms full of papers to grade, her mind occupied with plans for the next week's lessons. She did not notice the man following her until he spoke. Miss Morrison. Eleanor turned and felt her blood run cold. Jack Riley stood 5 feet away, his face flushed with alcohol, his eyes glazed with a mean drunk that she recognized too well from her father before he had died when she was young. Mr. Riley, can I help you with something? She kept her voice steady, professional, even as her heart began to hammer against her ribs. You can stop acting like you are better than everyone else, Riley slurred, taking a step closer. Walking around town with your nose in the air, thinking you are too good for the likes of us. I do not think that at all. Eleanor took a step back, calculating the distance to the boarding house to safety. If I have given you that impression, I apologize. Now if you will excuse me, I am not done talking. Riley grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. You think you are so special, but I know what you really are. I heard the rumors from back east. You are just a— Let her go, Riley. Colt's voice cut through the evening air like a knife, cold and dangerous in a way Eleanor had never heard before. He stood 10 feet away, his stance deceptively relaxed, but there was something coiled and lethal in his posture that made even drunk Riley hesitate. This is not your business, Brennan, Riley said, but his grip on Eleanor's arm loosened slightly. The lady is my business. Let her go. Now. There was no room for argument in Colt's tone. Riley released Eleanor's arm with a shove that nearly sent her sprawling. Colt was there instantly, his hand steady on her elbow, supporting her without restraining. You all right? He asked quietly, his eyes never leaving Riley. I am fine, Eleanor managed, though her whole body was shaking. You are making a mistake, Brennan, Riley sneered. Ask her about Philadelphia. Ask her what she was doing before she came running out here with her tail between her legs. Whatever happened before she came to Redemption is none of my business and none of yours, Colt said evenly. But if you ever touch her again, if you ever speak to her again, if you even look at her wrong, I will make it my business in ways you will not enjoy. Are we clear? For a moment, Eleanor thought Riley would swing at him. But something in Colt's eyes must have penetrated the alcoholic haze because Riley just spat on the ground and stalked off into the gathering darkness, muttering curses under his breath. The moment he was gone, Eleanor's legs gave out. She would have collapsed if Colt had not caught her, his strong arm steadying her gently. Easy now, you are safe, he is gone. You should not have, people will talk, Riley was right about. The words tumbled out in a panicked rush that made no sense even to her own ears. Riley is a drunk and a fool, and I do not care what he or anyone else has to say, Colt said firmly. Can you walk? Let me get you home. Eleanor wanted to refuse, wanted to pull away and prove that she did not need help from him or anyone. But the truth was that she was shaking so badly she could barely stand. And the prospect of walking alone in the dark after Riley's attack was more than she could bear. She nodded mutely, and Colt kept one hand light on her elbow as he guided her the remaining blocks to the boarding house. He did not speak, did not ask questions, just provided silent, steady support until they reached the front porch. Martha took one look at Eleanor's face and immediately took charge, ushering her inside with questions about what happened and threats about what she would do to Riley the next time she saw him. Colt explained briefly, his tone carefully neutral, and Martha's face hardened with anger. That man has been nothing but trouble since he arrived. I am kicking him out first thing tomorrow morning, Martha declared. Miss Morrison, you come sit down. I will make you some tea. Eleanor allowed herself to be led to the parlor, sinking onto the settee with legs that still felt like water. Colt followed, taking up a position near the door, his hat in his hands, watching her with those dark eyes that seemed to see everything. Martha returned with tea that Eleanor dutifully sipped even though she tasted nothing. Gradually, the shaking subsided, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made her feel hollowed out and fragile. I should let you rest, Colt said after a while, his voice gentle. But before I go, I need to know, do you want me to report this to the sheriff? What Riley did was assault. He should face consequences. No, Eleanor said quickly, panic flaring again. Please, I do not want to make a fuss, I just want to forget it happened. Colt frowned, clearly unhappy with this response. Miss Morrison, please. She met his eyes, willing him to understand. I cannot, I do not want, please just let it go. He studied her for a long moment, and Eleanor had the terrible feeling that he understood far more than she wanted him to. But finally, he nodded. All right, I will let it go, but Riley leaves town tomorrow one way or another. And if he so much as looks at you before he goes, all bets are off. Thank you, Eleanor whispered. For everything? Colt settled his hat on his head and moved toward the door, but he paused at the threshold, looking back at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You do not owe me thanks, Miss Morrison, and for what it is worth, I do not care what happened in Philadelphia or anywhere else. Whatever you were running from when you came here, whatever mistakes you think you made, they do not define you, not to me." Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor staring after him with tears streaming down her face that she could not seem to stop. That night marked a turning point, though Eleanor did not realize it at the time. Riley left town the next morning without incident. Whether voluntarily or because Colt had helped him make that decision, Eleanor never knew and did not ask. But the encounter had shattered something in her, some carefully maintained wall that she had built around herself for protection. She found herself thinking about what Colt had said, about mistakes not defining her. Found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, he meant it, if maybe running to Texas had not been enough and she needed to do the much harder work of forgiving herself. It was Martha who finally forced her to confront it, cornering Eleanor in her room 3 days after the incident with Riley. The older woman shut the door firmly and fixed Eleanor with a look that brooked no nonsense. "All right, girl. Time to talk. What happened to you back in Philadelphia?" Eleanor's first instinct was to lie, to deflect, to protect her secrets the way she had been protecting them for over a year. But she was so tired of carrying the weight alone, tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of being afraid of everything and everyone, so she told Martha everything. About Thomas and his promises, about the way he had made her believe she was loved, about the night she had given herself to him thinking they would be married within the month. About waking up the next morning to find him gone and the rumors already starting. About losing everything, her job, her reputation, any hope of a respectable future in Philadelphia. Martha listened without interruption, her face grave but not judgmental. When Eleanor finally fell silent, exhausted from the confession, Martha reached out and took her hand. "That man was a scoundrel and a liar, and what he did to you was wrong," Martha said firmly. "But you did not do anything wrong by trusting someone you thought loved you. Love requires trust. That is not a weakness, girl. That is just being human." "I was such a fool," Eleanor whispered. "How could I have believed?" "You believed because he gave you reason to believe," Martha interrupted. "That was his crime, not yours, and coming out here, starting over, building a new life, that took more courage than I think you realize." She squeezed Eleanor's hand. "But you cannot keep punishing yourself forever. At some point you have to decide that you deserve to be happy again." "I do not know if I can," Eleanor admitted. "Every time I think about trusting someone, about letting someone close, all I can remember is how much it hurt when Thomas left." "I cannot go through that again, Martha. I cannot." "Not every man is like Thomas," Martha said gently. "Some men are actually worth the risk." Eleanor knew exactly who Martha was talking about, and the knowledge terrified her more than Riley's threats ever had. Because Colt Brennan was dangerous in a way Thomas had never been. Thomas had been easy to fall for, charming and smooth and too good to be true. Colt was different. Quiet and steady and genuine in ways that made her want to trust him, even though every lesson she had learned screamed that trust would only lead to destruction. "I am terrified of being hurt again," Eleanor whispered, finally giving voice to the fear that lived in her chest like a stone. "I know it is cowardly, but I am so afraid that if I let myself feel anything, I will just end up broken all over again." "Feeling afraid is not cowardly," Martha said firmly. "Acting on that fear, letting it control your life, that is when it becomes a problem." "You have been given a second chance here, Eleanor. Do not waste it by hiding in your fear." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to explain that hiding was safer than risking, that nothing was worth the kind of pain Thomas had caused. But the words would not come. Instead, she found herself thinking about Colt's steady presence, his quiet kindness, the way he had defended her without asking for anything in return. Maybe Martha was right. Maybe not every man was like Thomas. But knowing that intellectually and being able to act on it emotionally were two very different things. The days grew shorter as autumn deepened toward winter. Eleanor threw herself into her teaching, organizing a Thanksgiving program for the school that involved all 18 of her students and half the town. It was exhausting work, but it gave her something to focus on besides the confusing tangle of emotions that Colt Brennan seemed to inspire every time she saw him, and she saw him often. He had apparently appointed himself her unofficial guardian, appearing whenever she needed help with something, walking her home on the evenings when she stayed late at the schoolhouse, always maintaining a respectful distance, but always there. It should have annoyed her. Should have made her feel smothered or obligated or afraid. Instead, she found herself looking forward to those moments, to the sound of his voice and the warmth of his presence. Found herself relaxing in increments, laughing at his quiet observations, sharing details about her day without thinking about whether it was safe to do so. She realized with dawning horror, starting to trust him. And that terrified her more than anything Riley had threatened. It was late November, 2 days before the Thanksgiving program, when Colt finally broke through the last of her defenses without even trying. Eleanor had stayed late at the schoolhouse, working on the final preparations for the program, and had lost track of time. By the time she locked up and started for the boarding house, full darkness had fallen and the temperature had dropped precipitously. She was halfway home when she realized she had left her shawl at the schoolhouse. The cold bit through her dress immediately and she wrapped her arms around herself, walking faster, cursing her own distraction. She would have to go back for it tomorrow. "Miss Morrison, what are you doing out here without a coat?" Colt's voice came out of the darkness, and then he was there, shrugging out of his heavy jacket and draping it over her shoulders before she could protest. The coat was warm from his body, and it smelled like leather and wood smoke and something indefinably him. Eleanor pulled it tighter around herself, grateful despite the protest she knew she should be making. "I left my shawl at the schoolhouse. I did not realize how cold it had gotten." "I will walk you home and then fetch your shawl for you," Colt said, falling into step beside her. "You do not have to do that," Eleanor protested weakly. "I can get it tomorrow." "I know I do not have to, I want to." His voice was gentle but firm. "Let me help you, Eleanor." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She should correct him, should insist on formality and distance and all the things that kept her safe. But instead, she found herself saying, "All right." "Thank you, Colt." They walked in comfortable silence, their breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. Eleanor was acutely aware of his presence beside her, solid and steady and warm despite the cold. Aware of the way his coat enveloped her like an embrace. Aware of the way her heart seemed to beat faster whenever he was near. "I have been wanting to talk to you about something," Colt said as they neared the boarding house. "But I kept finding excuses not to, and I think if I do not say it now, I never will." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "What is it?" He stopped walking, turning to face her, and in the moonlight his eyes were dark and serious. "I know you have been hurt. I do not know the details and I do not need to, but I see the way you flinch when people get too close, the way you keep everyone at arm's length. I see the fear in your eyes and it makes me want to find whoever put it there and make them pay for it." "Colt," Eleanor's voice came out strangled, "I am not finished." His voice was still gentle, but there was an intensity to it now that made her breath catch. "I also see your strength. The way you care for your students, the way you keep going even when I know you are afraid, the way you smile when you think no one is watching. You are the bravest person I have ever met, Eleanor, and I have spent the last 3 months falling in love with you." The world seemed to stop. Eleanor stared at him, unable to process what he had just said, unable to breathe or think or do anything except feel the rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I do not expect anything from you," Colt continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I am not telling you this to pressure you or to make you uncomfortable. I just needed you to know. Needed you to know that you are worth loving, that someone sees you for who you really are and loves every part of what they see. How can you love me?" The words burst out of Eleanor before she could stop them. "You do not even know me. You do not know what I have done, what happened." "I know that you are kind and smart and dedicated to your students," Colt interrupted. "I know that you love books and hate early mornings, and that you get this little wrinkle between your eyebrows when you are concentrating. I know that you put honey in your tea, and that you cannot carry a tune to save your life, but you hum when you grade papers anyway. I know that whatever happened to you in Philadelphia hurt you badly enough that you ran 3,000 miles to escape it. And I know that you have spent every day since then being brave enough to keep going even when you are terrified." Tears were streaming down Eleanor's face now, hot against her cold cheeks. "I am terrified of being hurt again," she whispered, the confession torn from somewhere deep inside her. "I let myself trust someone once and he destroyed me. I cannot go through that again, Colt, I cannot." "Then I will prove to you that you are safe," Colt said quietly, his voice fierce with conviction. "I will prove it every day for as long as it takes. I will not rush you or push you or demand anything you are not ready to give. I will just be here, steady and true, until you believe that not all men are like the one who hurt you." "What if I can never believe it?" Eleanor's voice broke on the words. "What if I am too broken to trust anyone ever again?" "Then I will love you anyway," Colt said simply. "Broken or whole, afraid or brave, whatever you can give me is enough. You are enough, Eleanor, just as you are." Something inside Eleanor cracked wide open at those words, some frozen, guarded part of her heart that she had thought was dead forever. She had spent over a year believing that she was ruined, that Thomas had taken something from her that could never be restored, that no decent man would ever want her once he knew the truth. But Colt was looking at her like she was precious, like she was whole. Like her past did not matter half as much as who she chose to be in the present. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted, her voice small and scared. "I do not know how to let someone in again." "Then let me help you learn," Colt said gently. He extended his hand to her, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. "One step at a time, Eleanor. No expectations, no pressure. Just a chance to see where this could go if you are brave enough to try." Eleanor stared at his hand, her mind screaming warnings about all the ways this could end in disaster. But her heart, that treacherous, stubborn organ, was already reaching out, already hoping, already daring to believe that maybe, just maybe, Martha was right and not all men were like Thomas. Slowly, trembling, she placed her hand in his. Colt's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and infinitely gentle. "Thank you for trusting me," he said quietly. "I promise I will do everything in my power to be worthy of it." They stood there in the moonlight, hands clasped, neither speaking, while Eleanor tried to process the magnitude of what had just happened. She had taken the first step back into the light, and while the fear still lived in her chest, it was no longer the only thing she felt. There was also hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The Thanksgiving program was a triumph. The schoolhouse was packed with parents and townspeople who watched with pride as the children performed songs and recitations, and a short play about the first Thanksgiving that Eleanor had adapted for their skill levels. Even the youngest students, nervous and adorable in their carefully pressed clothes, managed their lines without major mishap. Eleanor stood at the back of the room, watching her students shine, and felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the success of the program. These children trusted her. This community had welcomed her. And standing near the door, his eyes warm with pride and something deeper every time he looked at her, was a man who had somehow convinced her that maybe she was not as broken as she had believed. After the program ended and the last proud parent had left with their child, Eleanor found herself alone in the schoolhouse with the debris of the evening discarded programs, a forgotten jacket, the props from the play. She was gathering everything into a basket when Colt appeared in the doorway. "Need help cleaning up?" Eleanor smiled, and it felt natural, unforced. "I would appreciate that, thank you." They worked together in comfortable silence, straightening desks and sweeping the floor. It had been 3 days since Colt's declaration. 3 days of careful navigation as Eleanor tried to figure out what it meant to be courted by someone who actually respected her boundaries. Colt had been true to his word, giving her space while still making his presence felt, never pushing, always patient. It was terrifying and wonderful and completely unlike anything she had experienced with Thomas. "The children did beautifully tonight," Colt said as he stacked the last of the chairs. "You should be proud." "I am," Eleanor admitted. "They worked so hard. I just hope they enjoyed it as much as everyone else did." "They did. Sarah Patterson told me it was the best night of her whole life." Colt smiled, and Eleanor felt her heart skip in that now familiar way. "You are good at this, you know, teaching, making children believe in themselves. It is a gift." "It is all I ever wanted to do," Eleanor said quietly. "Even when everything else fell apart, I knew that if I could just get back to teaching, I could survive anything." Colt studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Can I ask you something? You do not have to answer if you do not want to." Eleanor tensed instinctively but forced herself to nod. "All right. That night with Riley, he said something about rumors from Philadelphia, and you have mentioned being hurt before, running from something." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I do not need to know the details. But I wonder if maybe it would help to tell someone, to stop carrying the weight alone." Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse, to change the subject, to retreat behind the walls she had spent over a year building. But she was tired of hiding, tired of letting Thomas's betrayal define her life. And if she was going to try to trust Colt, really trust him, maybe that meant being honest about the things that scared her most. "There was a man in Philadelphia," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "His name was Thomas Whitmore. He courted me for 6 months, said all the right things, made all the right promises. Said he loved me and wanted to marry me." Colt said nothing, just listened with complete attention, and somehow that made it easier to continue. "I believed him. I was so lonely and he was so charming, and I truly thought he meant it. So when we," she stopped, unable to say the words, her face burning with shame. "You do not have to explain," Colt said gently. "I understand." "The next morning he was gone," Eleanor continued, needing to finish now that she had started. "And within days, everyone knew. He had told people, boasted about it, about me. The school where I taught let me go because I was no longer a proper moral example for young ladies. My friends stopped speaking to me. My own mother could barely look at me without disappointment. Eleanor, I was ruined," she said, the word tasting bitter. "That is what they called me, ruined, like I was a piece of fruit that had gone bad, and maybe they were right. Maybe I deserved—" "Stop." Colt's voice was sharp, cutting through her self-recrimination. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands in his grip firm but gentle. "You did not deserve any of that. That man was a predator who manipulated you and then destroyed your reputation to cover his own guilt. None of what happened was your fault." "I should have known," Eleanor protested weakly. "I should have seen." "How?" Colt demanded. "How were you supposed to see through someone who was deliberately lying to you? That is what men like him do, Eleanor. They find good people and they twist their trust into something ugly, but that ugliness belongs to him, not to you." Eleanor wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it hurt. But the voices in her head that sounded like her mother, like the headmistress at the school, like every person in Philadelphia who had looked at her with judgment and pity, they would not be silenced so easily. "The rumors followed me here," she said, her voice breaking. "Riley knew. And if he knew, others might know too. Eventually everyone will find out what I am, and then nothing," Colt interrupted firmly, "because you are not what those rumors say. You are a woman who trusted the wrong person and paid a price you did not deserve. That does not make you ruined or shameful or anything except human." He ducked his head, forcing her to meet his eyes. "And even if every person in this town knew everything that happened, it would not change how I feel about you, not by one single bit." "How can you say that?" Eleanor whispered. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Colt said simply. "And I want to know more. I want to know everything about you, Eleanor Morrison, the good and the bad and everything in between. I want to hear about your childhood and your favorite books and what you dream about when you let yourself dream. I want to be there for all of it if you will let me. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, some fundamental reordering of how she saw herself and her future. For over a year, she had believed that Thomas had destroyed any chance she had at happiness, at love, at a normal life. But here was Colt, offering her all of those things with complete sincerity, asking for nothing except the chance to prove himself worthy. "I am so scared," she admitted, tears sliding down her cheeks. "What if I let myself believe in this and you change your mind?" "What if—" "I will not change my mind," Colt said with absolute conviction. "I am not going anywhere, Eleanor. You can test me all you want, push me away as many times as you need to, take as long as you want to decide if this is what you want. I will still be here, I promise." "How can you promise that? You cannot know." "Yes, I can." He released one of her hands to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away her tears with heartbreaking gentleness. "Because I know myself. I know that when I commit to something, I see it through, and I am committing to you, Eleanor. To being the man you deserve, to proving that you are safe with me." Eleanor closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite the fear that still whispered warnings in her ear. She had been so certain that she would never trust anyone again, never let anyone close enough to hurt her. But Colt was different from Thomas in every way that mattered. Patient where Thomas had been pushy. Honest where Thomas had been manipulative. Steady where Thomas had been changeable. Maybe Martha was right. Maybe not every man was like Thomas. Maybe some men were actually worth the risk. "I want to believe you," she whispered, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "I want to try, but I need you to be patient with me. I need you to understand that there will be days when I am afraid, when I pull away, when I doubt everything." "I can do that," Colt promised. "As long as you keep trying, I will keep being patient. Deal?" Eleanor managed a watery smile. "Deal." Colt smiled back, and the warmth in his eyes made her chest ache with something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Can I walk you home now? It is getting late." Eleanor nodded, and they finished cleaning the schoolhouse together before stepping out into the cold November night. Colt offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy, and after only a moment's hesitation, Eleanor took it. They walked slowly through the quiet streets of Redemption, and Eleanor marveled at how different this felt from every moment she had spent with Thomas. There was no urgency here, no pressure, no sense that she owed Colt anything for his attention. Just the quiet comfort of walking beside someone who genuinely seemed to enjoy her company, who asked for nothing more than she was ready to give. When they reached the boarding house, Colt released her arm and stepped back, maintaining the careful distance he had established. "Thank you for trusting me tonight," he said quietly. "I know it was not easy." "Thank you for listening," Eleanor replied, "and for not judging." "Never." He tipped his hat to her, a gesture that managed to be both respectful and affectionate. "Sleep well, Eleanor. I will see you tomorrow." Eleanor watched him walk away into the darkness, then climbed the steps to the boarding house with a lighter heart than she had felt in over a year. Maybe she could do this. Maybe she could learn to trust again. Maybe there was a future waiting for her that did not involve hiding in fear. Maybe, just maybe, she could be happy again. Winter came to Redemption with surprising force, bringing cold winds and even a light dusting of snow that delighted the children and made Eleanor grateful for the wood stove in the schoolhouse. The weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas passed in a blur of lessons and preparations for the holiday program, and through it all, Colt was there. Not in an overwhelming way, but in quiet moments that accumulated into something profound. He brought her firewood without being asked. Fixed the schoolhouse roof when it actually did develop a leak during a rainstorm. Walked her home on dark evenings and never once tried to do more than hold her hand. Eleanor found herself looking forward to those moments with an eagerness that both thrilled and terrified her. Found herself smiling when she heard his voice, relaxing when he was near, laughing at his dry observations about ranch life and town gossip. Slowly, carefully, she was letting him into her heart, and while the fear was still present, it was no longer the only thing she felt. It was early December, when Colt invited her to Sunday dinner at the Morrison Ranch. Catherine Morrison had extended the invitation through Martha, making it clear that it was a casual family meal and Eleanor would be very welcome. Eleanor knew immediately that this was Colt's doing, his way of helping her feel more connected to the community, and the thoughtfulness of it made her chest ache. She accepted the invitation with a mix of nerves and anticipation. On Sunday afternoon, Colt picked her up in a borrowed wagon, looking almost nervous himself as he helped her up to the seat. The drive out to the ranch was beautiful, the winter landscape stark but lovely under a pale blue sky. "You do not have to be nervous," Colt said after they had been riding in silence for several minutes. "Catherine is lovely and her family is good people. They will adore you." "I am not nervous," Eleanor lied, then laughed at his skeptical look. "All right, I am terrified. I have never been good at social situations, and after everything that happened in Philadelphia—" "This is not Philadelphia," Colt said gently. "And these people already like you. Catherine has been singing your praises ever since the Thanksgiving program. Just be yourself. That is more than enough." Eleanor wanted to argue that being herself had gotten her into trouble before, but she held her tongue. Colt was trying to help, and she appreciated it even if the anxiety still churned in her stomach. The Morrison Ranch was bustling when they arrived. Catherine greeted them at the door with a warm smile and ushered them inside to a large, comfortable dining room where her husband Daniel and their 2 young sons were already seated. Daniel Morrison was a tall, quiet man with kind eyes who shook Eleanor's hand with genuine warmth, and the boys, ages 7 and 9, peppered her with questions about school until Catherine laughingly told them to give Miss Morrison a chance to breathe. The meal was delicious and surprisingly relaxed. Catherine kept the conversation flowing easily, asking Eleanor about her impressions of Texas and sharing stories about the ranch with humor and affection. Daniel contributed occasional dry observations that made everyone laugh, and the boys were well-behaved and charming in the way of children trying to impress a teacher. Eleanor found herself relaxing despite her nerves, drawn in by the genuine warmth of the family. This was what she had always dreamed of, a home filled with love and laughter, people who cared for each other without conditions or ulterior motives. The contrast to her own childhood, to the cold silence that had filled her mother's house after her father died, was striking. After dinner, Catherine suggested that Eleanor might enjoy seeing the horses while she put the boys down for a nap. Eleanor agreed readily, and Colt led her out to the stables with obvious pride. The Morrison Ranch boasted some of the finest horses in Texas, and Colt was clearly in his element as he introduced Eleanor to each one, explaining their lineages and personalities with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for talking about family members. Eleanor listened with genuine interest, charmed by his passion and the gentle way he handled each animal. "This is the mare I helped with that first night after you arrived," Colt said, stopping at a stall where a beautiful chestnut horse stood with a gangly foal at her side. "And this is her son. We call him Courage because he came into the world fighting." Eleanor reached out tentatively to stroke the mare's nose, smiling when the horse huffed warm breath against her hand. "They are beautiful. They are special," Colt agreed. "I love this work. Love helping these animals, being part of something that matters. It is one of the reasons I stayed in Texas after my father died. Montana had too many memories, too much sadness, but here I could build something new." "I understand that," Eleanor said quietly, watching the foal nuzzle against his mother. "Sometimes starting over is the only way to survive." "Is that what this is for you?" Colt asked. Survival? Eleanor considered the question. A month ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. But now, standing in the warm stable with Colt beside her and hope tentatively blooming in her chest, she was not so sure. "It started as survival," she admitted. "But maybe it is becoming something more." Colt smiled, and the warmth in his eyes made her pulse skip. "I am glad." You deserve more than just survival, Eleanor. You deserve happiness. So do you, she said impulsively, then felt her cheeks heat. I mean what I meant to say. I know what you meant. Colt's voice was gentle, and he reached out to take her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. And for what it is worth, I am happier than I have been in years. You did that, just by being here, by letting me know you, by giving me a chance. You made me believe in things I had stopped believing in. What things? Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That good things can happen to good people. That patience is rewarded. That sometimes, if you are very lucky, the right person comes along at exactly the right time. He squeezed her hand gently. You are my right person, Eleanor. I knew it the first time I saw you step off that stagecoach, looking terrified and determined and beautiful. Eleanor's heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. I was not beautiful. I was a mess. You were beautiful, Colt insisted. You are beautiful. And brave and strong and everything I did not know I was looking for. Eleanor stared at him, seeing the absolute sincerity in his eyes, the open vulnerability that she knew cost him to show. He was offering her his heart without reservation, trusting that she would not destroy it the way Thomas had destroyed hers. And in that moment, standing in a stable with the scent of hay and horses around them and winter sunshine streaming through the windows, Eleanor made a choice. She chose to be brave, chose to believe, chose to take the leap that terrified her more than anything else in the world. I am falling in love with you, she whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep inside. I have been trying so hard not to, trying to protect myself, but I am falling anyway, and it terrifies me. Colt's expression transformed, joy and wonder mixing with something that looked almost like relief. You do not have to be terrified, he said softly, releasing her hand to cup her face with both of his touch infinitely gentle. You are safe with me, Eleanor. I will prove it every day for the rest of our lives if you let me. I want to believe that, Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face. I want it so much. Then believe it, Colt urged. Take a chance on us, on me. I promise I will not let you regret it. Eleanor searched his eyes, looking for any hint of deception, any shadow of the lies Thomas had told. But there was nothing there except honesty and love and a patience that seemed infinite. And finally, after over a year of running and hiding and protecting herself, Eleanor let the last of her walls crumble. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will take a chance on us. Colt's smile was incandescent. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and brushed his lips against hers in a kiss so gentle it made her ache. It was nothing like the hungry, demanding kisses Thomas had given her. This was reverent and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Eleanor was crying and smiling at the same time, her heart feeling lighter than it had in longer than she could remember. What do we do now? She asked. Now we take it one day at a time, Colt said, resting his forehead against hers. We court properly. I will ask your permission before I hold your hand and walk you home after church, and generally make it very clear to everyone in town that you are being courted by a man who intends to marry you if you will have him. Marry, Eleanor's voice came out strangled. Eventually, Colt clarified quickly. Not tomorrow or next week, whenever you are ready. I am not going anywhere, remember, we have all the time in the world. Eleanor laughed, the sound watery but genuine. You are very sure of yourself. I am very sure of you, Colt corrected, and of us. But I am also sure that you need time to trust that, and I am prepared to wait as long as it takes. They stood there for a long moment, foreheads touching, hands clasped, while Eleanor tried to process the magnitude of what had just happened. She had taken the leap, had admitted her feelings, had opened herself up to the possibility of being hurt again. And instead of the terror she expected, what she felt was mostly hope. Maybe this was what healing looked like. Maybe it was not a dramatic moment, but a series of small choices to keep trying, keep trusting, keep believing that better things were possible. Maybe Colt was right, and she was brave enough to do this. We should probably get back before Catherine comes looking for us, Eleanor said eventually, reluctantly pulling away. Probably, Colt agreed, but he stole one more quick kiss before releasing her hand. But for the record, I am very happy right now. So am I, Eleanor admitted, and realized with some surprise that it was completely true. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and if Catherine noticed Eleanor's tear-stained face and Colt's ridiculous grin, she was kind enough not to comment. The ride back to town later that afternoon was filled with comfortable conversation and stolen glances, and when Colt walked Eleanor to the door of the boarding house, he kissed her hand like a character in one of the novels she loved. "Can I call on you tomorrow?" he asked. "I would like that," Eleanor replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Eleanor thought about how much her life had changed in just a few short months. She had come to redemption broken and afraid, convinced that she would never be whole again. But Colt had seen through her fear to the person underneath, and he had loved her anyway. Had proven day after patient day that not all men were like Thomas, that trust was still possible, that she deserved happiness. She still had moments of fear. Still woke sometimes in the night gripped by panic that this was all a dream or a mistake. But increasingly, those moments were balanced by others, moments of joy and laughter and the quiet certainty that she had finally found a place where she belonged. The weeks leading up to Christmas were some of the happiest Eleanor had ever known. Colt called on her every evening, and they would sit in Martha's parlor and talk for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Montana, about his father's wisdom and his mother's kindness, and the loneliness that had driven him south after his father's death. Eleanor shared stories about her childhood, about the books she loved, and the dreams she had nurtured before Thomas had shattered them. Colt listened to everything with the kind of attention that made her feel valued in ways she had never experienced before. He asked questions that proved he was truly interested, remembered details she had mentioned weeks earlier, treated her opinions as if they mattered. It was intoxicating and terrifying and wonderful all at once. For Christmas, Eleanor organized a program at the schoolhouse similar to the Thanksgiving one, with songs and recitations and small gifts for each child. The whole town turned out, and afterward there was a party at the church with food and music and dancing. Colt asked Eleanor to dance, and while she was self-conscious about her lack of skill, he guided her through the steps with patient good humor, until she was laughing too hard to worry about whether she was doing it right. "You are beautiful when you laugh," Colt said as the dance ended, his hands still on her waist, his eyes warm in the lantern light. "I love seeing you happy." "I am happy," Eleanor admitted, surprised by how true it was. "Happier than I have been in a very long time. You did that, Colt. You and your patience and your kindness. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever." "What did I give you?" Colt asked softly. "The ability to trust," Eleanor said simply, "the courage to believe in good things again." Colt's expression was tender as he leaned down to press a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You always had that courage, Eleanor. You just needed someone to remind you it was there." They were standing at the edge of the dance floor, half hidden in shadows, and Eleanor made a decision. She went up on her toes and kissed him properly, deeply, putting into the kiss all the things she still struggled to say out loud. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Colt's eyes were dark with emotion. "I love you," Eleanor whispered against his lips. "I am still scared sometimes, but I love you." "I love you too," Colt replied, his voice rough with feeling. "And I promise you, Eleanor, you never have to be scared with me. I will spend the rest of my life proving that you are safe." The new year of 1877 arrived with cold winds and the promise of spring still months away. Eleanor continued teaching, her confidence growing with each passing week as her students thrived under her guidance. The town had fully accepted her now, and she had built friendships with several of the mothers and even Eleanor Morrison, who treated Eleanor like a younger sister. Colt continued his patient courtship, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, always respecting the boundaries she set. But Eleanor found those boundaries shifting, her comfort with him growing as he proved again and again that he was nothing like Thomas. He was steady where Thomas had been changeable, honest where Thomas had been manipulative, patient where Thomas had been demanding. It was late February when Colt asked Eleanor to take a ride with him out to a piece of land on the outskirts of Redemption. She agreed readily, curious about why he seemed almost nervous as he helped her up into the wagon. They drove in comfortable silence until they reached a spot where the valley opened up, revealing rolling grassland backed by distant hills. "What do you think?" Colt asked, bringing the wagon to a stop. "It is beautiful," Eleanor said honestly. "Why did you bring me here?" Colt climbed down and came around to help her descend, then stood looking out over the land with an expression she could not quite read. "I have been saving for the last 5 years," he said quietly. "Working at the Morrison ranch, taking extra jobs, putting every penny away. And last month I had enough to buy this land." Eleanor's breath caught. "Colt, that is wonderful. Are you going to start your own ranch?" "That is the idea." He turned to face her, and Eleanor saw vulnerability in his eyes that she recognized. "I want to build something here, Eleanor, a home. A future. Raise horses and maybe cattle, build a house, put down real roots." He paused, then added softly, "And I want to do it with you if you will have me." Eleanor's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "What are you saying?" Colt reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, Eleanor saw a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the winter sunlight. "I am saying that I love you, Eleanor Morrison. I am saying that I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you are safe and loved and cherished. I am saying that I want to build this ranch with you, raise a family with you, grow old with you." He dropped to one knee in the cold grass, looking up at her with his heart in his eyes. "Will you marry me?" Eleanor stared at him, her mind spinning, her heart pounding. This was what she had wanted with Thomas, the proposal, the promise of forever. But that had been a lie built on manipulation and selfishness. This was different. Colt was different. He had spent 6 months proving his sincerity, his patience, his genuine love for her. And yet the fear was still there, whispering that she was making a mistake, that she would regret this, that opening herself up would only lead to pain. "I am terrified," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I want to say yes, but I am so scared, Colt. What if—" "Then I will prove you are safe," Colt said firmly, echoing the promise he had made months ago in the schoolhouse. "Every single day, Eleanor. I will prove it with my actions and my words and my choices. I will prove that you can trust me, that I will never hurt you the way you were hurt before, that your heart is safe with me." "How can you promise that?" Eleanor asked desperately. "People change, feelings change." "What if people do change?" Colt agreed. "But my love for you is not a feeling that will fade, Eleanor. It is a choice I make every single day. A choice to honor you and protect you and cherish you, and I will keep making that choice every day for the rest of my life." Eleanor looked at him kneeling in the grass, this good, patient man who had somehow seen past her fear and brokenness to the person she was underneath. Who had loved her not despite her past but including it, accepting all of her as worthy of devotion. Who had asked for nothing except the chance to prove himself, and who had done exactly that over and over again. She thought about the 6 months since she had arrived in Redemption. Thought about every moment Colt had shown up when she needed him, every kindness he had offered without expectation of return, every time he had respected her boundaries even when she knew it cost him. Thought about the way he made her laugh, the way he listened like her words mattered, the way he looked at her like she was precious. And she realized that somewhere along the way, despite her fear, she had already made her choice. Had already decided to trust him, to believe in the future he was offering. The only thing left was to say the words out loud. "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, I will marry you." Colt surged to his feet, his face transformed with joy, and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both laughing and crying at the same time. When he finally set her down, he slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then kissed her with a tenderness that made her soul ache. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this." "I love you too," Eleanor replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for not giving up." "I would have waited forever," Colt said simply. "You are worth it." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out over the land that would become their home. Eleanor felt the last of her fear dissolving, replaced by a certainty that was almost overwhelming. This was right. Colt was right. They were right together. "When do you want to get married?" Colt asked eventually. Eleanor considered. Part of her wanted to wait, to have a long engagement that would give her more time to adjust to the idea. But another part, the braver part that Colt had helped her find, knew that waiting would only invite doubt and fear back in. "Soon," she said decisively. "I do not need a big wedding or months of planning. I just need you and me and a promise before God that we are committed to this." Colt's smile was incandescent. "Are you sure? I do not want you to feel rushed." "I am sure," Eleanor said, and realized it was true. "I have spent over a year being cautious and afraid. I am ready to choose courage instead." They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Redemption, with Martha and the Morrisons as witnesses and half the town crammed into the pews. Eleanor wore a simple white dress that Catherine had helped her make, and Colt wore a new suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. When the Reverend asked if she took this man to be her lawfully wedded husband, Eleanor said, "I do," with a clear, strong voice that held not a trace of doubt. The kiss Colt gave her when they were pronounced husband and wife was gentle and reverent and full of promise. And when Eleanor looked out at the congregation and saw the genuine happiness on their faces, she felt the last chains of her past finally break free. She was not ruined. She was not shameful. She was simply a woman who had made mistakes and survived them, who had found love in the most unexpected place, who had been brave enough to try again. The reception was held at the Morrison Ranch, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Eleanor danced with Colt until her feet hurt, laughed with friends she had made in this unlikely town, and felt happier than she had ever thought possible. When Colt finally declared it was time to leave, Eleanor said her goodbyes with genuine affection and allowed her new husband to drive her to the small cabin he had built on their land. It was nothing fancy, just 2 rooms and a loft, but Colt had built it with his own hands and furnished it with care. There was a real bed with a quilt Martha had made, a stove for cooking, and a rocking chair positioned near the window where Eleanor could sit and read. Wildflowers in a jar on the table completed the scene, making it feel like home. "It is not much yet," Colt said, suddenly seeming nervous. "But I will build you a proper house, Eleanor." "Something big and beautiful with room for." Eleanor silenced him with a kiss, pouring into it all the love and gratitude and hope she felt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she said, "It is perfect. You are perfect. This is everything I ever wanted and more." Colt's expression was tender as he cupped her face in his hands. "I know this is your first time since," he stopped, clearly struggling for words. "I want you to know that we do not have to, that is, I can wait as long as you need." "I do not want to wait," Eleanor interrupted softly. "I want this, Colt, I want you. I want to replace those memories with new ones, good ones, with someone who loves me." "I do love you," Colt said fiercely. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone, and I promise, Eleanor, I will never take what you are not ready to give. Tell me if you need me to stop, if anything feels wrong." "I trust you," Eleanor said, and realized with some wonder that it was completely true. The fear that had lived in her for so long was still there, a faint whisper in the back of her mind. But it was drowned out by something stronger, love and trust, and the absolute certainty that Colt would never hurt her. What followed was everything her first experience was not. Colt was patient and gentle, constantly checking to make sure she was all right, that she was comfortable, that she wanted to continue. He worshipped her body with a reverence that made her cry, made her feel beautiful and cherished in ways she had never experienced. And when they finally came together, it was not about possession or conquest, but about two people choosing each other, committing to each other, loving each other with everything they had. Afterward, lying wrapped in Colt's arms with her head on his chest, Eleanor felt the last of Thomas's poison leach out of her soul. What he had taken from her had not been irreplaceable after all. What he had destroyed had been rebuilt by someone better, someone worthy, someone who understood that love was not about taking but about giving. "Are you all right?" Colt asked softly, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. "I am more than all right," Eleanor said honestly. "I am happy, truly, deeply happy. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for loving me." "Thank you for trusting me," Colt replied, "for giving me the chance to prove myself, for being brave enough to try again despite everything you had been through." "You made it easy," Eleanor said. "You proved over and over again that you were worthy of trust. I just had to be brave enough to accept it." They lay there in comfortable silence for a while, and Eleanor felt herself drifting towards sleep, safe and warm and loved. Just before she slipped away completely, she heard Colt whisper, "I will love you forever, Eleanor Brennan. That is a promise." Eleanor smiled against his chest. "I will love you forever too." The years that followed were not always easy. The ranch required back-breaking work, long hours, and constant attention. There were droughts that tested their resources, a particularly harsh winter that they nearly did not survive, and the ever-present challenges of making a living from the land. But through it all, Colt and Eleanor faced everything together. They built their life one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of trust and love at a time. Colt proved his promise every single day, treating Eleanor with a respect and devotion that never wavered. And Eleanor learned to trust not just him, but herself, to believe that she was capable of good judgment, worthy of love, deserving of happiness. Their first child arrived in the spring of 1878, a healthy baby boy they named James after Colt's father. Eleanor had been terrified throughout the pregnancy, worried that something would go wrong, that she was not capable of being a mother. But Colt had been there for every moment, supporting her through morning sickness and swollen ankles and the terrifying hours of labor. When she finally held James in her arms, looking down at his tiny, perfect face, Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. This was what love was supposed to feel like, pure and uncomplicated and infinite. And she had created this new life with a man who was teaching her every day what real love looked like. A daughter followed 2 years later, Elizabeth, with Eleanor's hazel eyes and Colt's stubborn determination. Then another son, Samuel, who was quiet and thoughtful and showed an early affinity for horses that made his father beam with pride. With each child, Eleanor's confidence in herself and in the life she had built grew stronger. The ranch prospered as well. Colt's skill with horses became known throughout Texas, and people traveled for days to buy his stock or have him train their animals. Eleanor turned their original cabin into a schoolroom, teaching their own children and several others from neighboring ranches. The house Colt had promised materialized slowly, room by room, until it was a sprawling, comfortable home filled with love and laughter and life. Eleanor never forgot what Thomas had done to her. The scars from that betrayal never fully disappeared. But they faded over time, becoming part of her history rather than the defining feature of her present. And whenever the fear threatened to resurface, whenever doubt crept in, Colt was there to remind her that she was safe, that she was loved, that she was enough exactly as she was. 20 years after Eleanor stepped off that stagecoach in Redemption, she sat on the porch of the home she and Colt had built, watching the sun set over their land. Their children were playing in the yard, James now 18 and preparing to attend college in Austin, Elizabeth 16 and beautiful and fierce, Samuel 14 and already taller than his mother. Inside, Colt was finishing up some paperwork, his reading glasses perched on his nose in a way that Eleanor found impossibly endearing. Martha had passed the winter before, peacefully in her sleep, and Eleanor still felt the loss keenly. But she took comfort in knowing that Martha had seen her find happiness, had witnessed the life she had built from the ashes of her past. Catherine Morrison remained a close friend, and the town of Redemption had become the home Eleanor had always dreamed of. Colt emerged from the house and settled into the rocking chair beside her, reaching out to take her hand in his. His hair was liberally streaked with gray now, and there were deep lines around his eyes, but to Eleanor he was just as handsome as the day she had met him. "What are you thinking about?" Colt asked, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "About how far we have come," Eleanor said softly. "About how scared I was that first day in Redemption and how you changed everything." "We changed everything," Colt corrected gently. "You were the one who was brave enough to try, Eleanor. I just gave you the space to find your courage." Eleanor smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember what I said to you that night in the schoolhouse, when you first told me you loved me?" "You said you were terrified of being hurt again," Colt said quietly. "And you said you would prove I was safe," Eleanor finished. "You kept that promise, Colt. Every single day for 20 years you kept that promise. You gave me back something I thought was lost forever, the ability to trust, to love, to believe in good things. You gave me just as much," Colt said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You gave me a purpose beyond just existing. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to be better than I thought I could be. You saved me just as much as I saved you." Eleanor thought about that, about the truth in his words. They had saved each other, she realized. Had built something beautiful from the broken pieces they had brought to their relationship, had proven that past pain did not have to define future joy. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I love you too," Colt replied, "and I never considered giving up, not for a single moment. You are my home, Eleanor, you always will be." They sat there on the porch as the sun sank below the horizon, hands clasped, hearts entwined, surrounded by the life they had built together. And Eleanor thought about the young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 20 years ago, broken and afraid and convinced that she would never be whole again. If she could go back and tell that young woman anything, it would be this: pain is not permanent. Trust can be rebuilt. Love is still possible, even after betrayal. And sometimes, if you are very lucky and very brave, you find someone who sees past your scars to the person underneath and loves you anyway. Colt had been that person for her. And she had been brave enough to let him prove it, day after patient day, until the fear finally receded, and all that was left was love. As darkness settled over their ranch and the stars began to emerge overhead, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude for every choice that had led her to this moment. For the courage to leave Philadelphia, for the decision to come to Redemption, for the willingness to give Colt a chance despite her terror. The children came inside as the evening grew cold, their voices carrying through the house in waves of laughter and good-natured bickering. Colt stood and offered Eleanor his hand, pulling her to her feet with the easy strength that had never diminished. "Come inside," he said softly. "It is getting cold, and James wants to talk to us about his plans for school." Eleanor followed him into the warmth and light of their home, surrounded by the family they had created, the life they had built, the love they had nurtured through 20 years of joy and hardship and everything in between. She had been terrified of being hurt again, and Colt had proven she was safe. But more than that, he had proven that she was capable of being brave, of choosing hope over fear, of building a future worth living. And as she looked around at her husband, her children, her home, Eleanor Brennan knew with absolute certainty that she had finally found what she had been searching for all along. Not perfection, but something better, a love that was real and honest and strong enough to weather anything. A partner who saw her at her worst and loved her anyway. A life that was hers, built on her own terms, full of the kind of happiness she had once thought impossible. The fear that Thomas had instilled in her was gone, replaced by the quiet confidence that came from being truly, deeply loved. And if that was not redemption, Eleanor did not know what was. Outside, the Texas night settled over the land, peaceful and still. Inside, the Brennan family gathered around the dinner table, sharing a meal and stories and the comfortable affection of people who belonged to each other. And Eleanor sat at the head of the table, her husband beside her, her children around her, and felt grateful for every moment that had led to this. She was no longer the broken woman who had arrived in redemption 20 years ago. She was Eleanor Brennan, wife, mother, teacher, survivor. She was loved and cherished and safe. And she was, finally and completely, home.